Question 4 of the 2008 test, checker objects. So this question is asking for you to make two classes and one assignment statement, and it's based around this interface checker. And it's an interface that requires a Boolean method called accept that takes a string as its only input. And this is required for every class that implements checker. The first question, part A, is asking you to create a substring checker that will accept any string and return true if it contains a particular substring and false if it doesn't. And that must have this Boolean accept method because it implements checker. The next question is asking for you to make a new class called andChecker, which also implements checker, but what it does is it will take two substring checkers. So you can see here this andChecker is being created with its instance data being one substring checker and another substring checker, each of which has their own text, and it will return true if both of those return true and false if either returns false. Part C involves the not checker, which you don't have to make the class this time. All you have to do is create this checker, yummy checker, with some combination of and checker and not checker, so that it will return true if neither artichokes nor kale is in the string, and if one of them is, it will return false. So first we're going to go through part A. So what we need to do is write the substring checker class that implements the checker interface with Boolean accept string text in that, of course. So here's our substring checker class. As you can see, it implements checker. It takes a string as its instance data. In the constructor, it will set the string in the constructor to the instance data, and then it has a Boolean accept just like it needs to right here. It takes string text, and what we're doing to check to see if the substring is in the bigger text, and this is just one way to do it. There are multiple ways to do it. We are going to loop through the larger string, which is text, but we're going to subtract the string.length from it plus 1 so that we don't get an array index out of bounds error. So we're going to check every time if substring from I to the string length plus I equals the string. So what that'll do is it'll start at every letter in the string and see if that substring plus the length, if a substring of that distance is equal to the thing we're checking for, which is str right here. If that's the case, we'll return true. If we loop through the whole string and we never get a return true, it'll return false. So that's one way to do that. Part B, create an and checker. So this is just gonna, so let's go back to and checker. As you can see, we have two checkers, and this also implements checker, so we need to have our accept, which is down here. All this has to do is check to see if C1 accepts the text and C2 accepts the text. If it does, it returns true. If it doesn't, it returns false. And that's all and checker has to do. It's pretty simple. You could do an if statement here if you wanted, but return looks nicer. Finally, part C. We need to write an assignment statement for yummy checker that will accept the string only if it doesn't contain artichokes or kale. Now what's important here is this up here about the not checker. A not checker will return true if the string is not in it. It will return false if the string is in the thing. And that's already created for us. We just have to use it in our assignment statement. So here's that. We create our checker, yummy checker, new and checker, because we want it to check two things. Inside of that is two not checkers. One not checks for kale, and one that not checks for artichoke. So what this will do, since it's an and checker, if this returns true and this returns true, the whole thing returns true. If one of those returns false, meaning either kale or artichoke is in the string, then the whole thing will return false, just like we're supposed to do. So that's how you do that. Okay, so now we're going to go through the rubric for this. So the important things that you need to have and how you get all 9 points on this question is, so first you need to make sure you're implementing checker on both of these, because you're making things that implement the interface checker, so you need to have those there. Next, you need to make sure you have instance data, because you are declaring a class, and it needs to be private, because that's the convention for Java. Next, you need a constructor, because all classes need a constructor. It needs to have the right type of parameters, and you need to make sure to set the instance variable to that parameter. Once again, this is for both and checker and substring checker. Next is the accept method, which remember you must have because it's implementing checker. So you need to make sure it's string text just like it is in the interface, and then you need to have a correct algorithm to see if the substring is contained, and then of course return true or false correctly. So here you could use index of, you could use contains. We used a for loop to compare substrings, so you get the points there. And then down here, all you need is an if statement to determine to accept text, and of course return true or false. And then yummy checker, it's all or nothing. If you do it right, like we did, then you get the point. If you don't get the point. So as you can see, it's really easy. If you know how to create a class in Java, it's really easy to get partial credit on this question. You correctly assign and you can make a good class. You're going to get 2 points here, 2 points up here, and a point down there. That's 5 points. That's higher than the average was on this question. All right, finally, to wrap up, some things that are in the notes about this question. The main intent of this question was to test the student on inheritance, class design, and Boolean logic. So it's testing your if statement skills, if you can do an if-else, if you can return true or false correctly, if you can make a class. It's an extremely important skill. And if you can do the inheritance correctly, because you have to be able to implement that interface checker correctly. So those are the main themes that this question is testing. Now, the average on this question was a 3.44 out of 9, but without scores of 0, because since it was the last question, some students may have run out of time. The average was a 4.94, which, as I said before, would be about what you did if you just created the classes correctly and correctly assigned, but you couldn't figure out the Boolean logic. So you could still get more than half the points if you can just make those classes. Now, most of the errors on this question were little things, like using extends instead of implements, because it's an interface, not a parent class. Make sure that the instance variables are private, not public, and make sure the accept method is public, not private, because other classes are going to use it, and making instance data the right type. And what the AP reader said was most important for teachers to know was that designing classes from scratch. So a lot of students clearly had trouble on this question because they just could not write a class from scratch totally correctly, whether that meant they couldn't get their instance data right, they couldn't implement the interface right, they forgot a constructor, things like that. That's the most important. That's how you get the majority of points on this question, and that's how you got to do well on the whole test.